They say blood is thicker than water, but they forget your family knows exactly where your veins are. I stared at my phone screen, watching $250,000 of my blood, sweat, and youth wiped out with one tap by my own relatives. Listen closely. This is not just a theft, it is a hunt in the dark, where I, the prey, smiled, turned around, and swallowed the wolf whole. Hello, dear listeners of Maya Revenge Stories, and thank you from the bottom of my heart for tuning in today. Unfortunately, YouTube has recently disabled our channel's monetization, leaving us with absolutely no budget to keep operating. If you find today's story compelling, please consider supporting us with just $1 by scanning the PayPal QR code on your screen or clicking the link in the description or the comments. Your kindness provides the budget to pay our hardworking staff so they can cover their living expenses and continue creating these stories for you. My name is Brielle Duncan. I am 32 years old, and my entire world is built on load-bearing walls, tensile strength, and cold, hard logic. As an independent structural engineer, I poured every ounce of my youth, my sweat, and every single penny I possessed into opening my own firm. Apex Vertex Architecture, right here in Chicago. I deal in concrete and steel. I am practical, perhaps a bit dry, and for as long as I can remember, I have been the reluctant financial pillar holding up the collapsing roof of my family. If I am the steel framework bearing the weight, my younger sister, Chloe, is the decorative ivy that slowly strangles the building. Chloe is undeniably beautiful, hopelessly flighty, and has spent her entire life perfectly playing the role of the fragile victim. Every mistake she makes is somehow the universe acting against her. Beside her stands her husband, Marcus. He calls himself an investment broker. He walks around in shiny, tightly tailored suits that look expensive from a distance, but up close, you can smell the desperation masking itself under heavy cologne. The truth is, Marcus is drowning in massive debt, constantly moving invisible money around to fund a lavish lifestyle they absolutely cannot afford. I should have recognized the danger years ago. When we were in our early 20s, I had to completely abandon my lifelong dream of studying architecture in Europe. I had worked double shifts and saved relentlessly for 4 years to make it happen. But Chloe had made a massive youthful mistake involving a wrecked vehicle and a threatened lawsuit. She came to my apartment sobbing, burying her face in her hands. She used our blood ties and her endless tears to drain my pity and my savings. I paid off her massive debts. I stayed in Chicago. I sacrificed my dreams while she simply wiped her eyes and moved on to her next disaster without a single scratch. Fast forward to just a few weeks ago. My firm was finally on the verge of a massive breakthrough. After months of grueling paperwork, meetings, and intense financial scrutiny, I was approved for a massive Small Business Administration loan. Exactly $250,000 was dispersed into my business account. This money was not for luxury or celebration. It was the exact amount required to secure raw materials and pay contractors for a massive commercial project that would determine whether my company survived or went permanently bankrupt. I was running on maybe 3 hours of sleep a night, completely buried under blueprints, vendor contracts, and immense stress. That was when Chloe visited my apartment. She brought her pampered little dog and immediately started complaining about how stressed her pet was. "Brielle, can I borrow your old iPad?" she asked, putting on her sweetest, most innocent voice. My poor baby refuses to eat unless he watches those sensory videos for dogs, and my phone screen is just too small for him. It sounded utterly ridiculous, but when you are exhausted and staring down the barrel of a massive construction deadline, you do not have the energy to argue over a piece of old technology. I waved my hand and told her to take it from the living room drawer. I did not realize the dog was just a convenient prop. The entire request was orchestrated by Marcus. He desperately needed an excuse to get his hands on my personal devices, and I, too blinded by my own work and exhaustion, handed him the keys to my financial ruin without a single second thought. The annual family reunion took place at Aunt Margaret's sprawling lakefront estate in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. I arrived 3 hours late. While my relatives spent their Friday afternoons sipping cocktails on the wooden deck, I was hunched over my desk in Chicago, obsessively reviewing structural blueprints until the lines on the paper blurred. When I finally pulled my car into the gravel driveway at 8 o'clock in the evening, the air was thick with the smell of expensive grilled steak and performative laughter. I stepped into the grand dining room, my shoulders aching from tension. The entire family was gathered around the massive oak table, but Marcus was the undisputed center of attention. He stood at the head of the table, wearing a crisp linen shirt, swirling a glass of expensive red wine, and lecturing everyone about a supposedly revolutionary real estate venture. "It is a guaranteed gold mine," Marcus boasted loudly, his teeth gleaming in the chandelier light. "We are talking about a 200% return on investment within the first 12 months. It is all about having the vision to spot the invisible trends." Aunt Margaret practically swooned, praising his unparalleled financial genius. Chloe sat beside him, beaming with pride as if she had personally engineered the deal. Then, Aunt Margaret turned her gaze to me, her smile tightening just a fraction. "And what about you, Brielle?" she asked, her tone dripping with polite condescension. "Are you still working with all that dusty cement and steel?" Before I could even attempt to explain the massive commercial contract I had just secured, Marcus interrupted. He gave a theatrical sigh and shook his head in mock sympathy. "Engineering is fine for a steady paycheck," Marcus said, offering me a patronizing smile. "But it is so rigid. Do you not think everything is governed by strict rules and safety margins? There is absolutely no room for breakthrough thinking. You will never build true generational wealth by playing it safe and staring at calculators all day long." I bit my tongue so hard I tasted copper. I wanted to scream that my rigid calculations kept skyscrapers from collapsing, and that my steady paycheck had funded his wife's endless mistakes for years. But I stayed silent. I was too exhausted to fight the familiar family dynamic where hard logic was always overshadowed by loud, empty confidence. Later that evening, after the older relatives had retired to their rooms, I stepped out onto the chilly patio to get some fresh air. Marcus followed me into the dark. He carried a heavy crystal glass filled with neat bourbon and pressed it directly into my hand. "Drink up. You look incredibly tense," he insisted, his voice suddenly smooth and unnervingly friendly. "I know I give you a hard time, but I really do respect your hustle. Chloe told me you finally got that huge government loan approved, $250,000, right?" I took a sip of the bourbon, the alcohol burning a hot trail down my throat. "Yes, the funds just cleared. I need to pay the suppliers by Monday morning." Marcus leaned closer, his eyes narrowing with intense curiosity. He poured another generous splash of liquor from his silver flask into my glass, practically forcing me to keep drinking. "That is a massive amount of liquid cash just sitting there," he murmured, swirling his own drink. "As your financial advisor, well, unofficially of course, I have to ask, how do you even secure $250,000? Corporate accounts are massive targets these days. Do you use physical security tokens, or just standard two-factor authentication?" The alcohol was rapidly making my head swim, blurring the sharp edges of my usual caution. "The bank has a highly encrypted portal," I replied, my voice slightly slurred and heavy. "It requires my master password and then an automatic security code sent directly to my registered cloud devices. It is completely airtight." Marcus smiled. It was a tight, strange expression that did not reach his eyes. "Fascinating. Just sending a code to your synced devices. Very convenient." He kept me on that cold patio for another hour, continuously topping off my drink while smoothly steering the conversation back to banking regulations, transfer limits, and cloud synchronization protocols. I was too tired and too inebriated to realize I was being systematically interrogated. I simply thought he was trying to show off his industry knowledge. Sometime around 3 o'clock in the morning, I woke up with a splitting headache and a mouth as dry as sandpaper. I stumbled out of my guest bedroom to find the kitchen for some water. The vast house was completely silent, draped in heavy, suffocating shadows. As I walked barefoot down the long, carpeted hallway, a faint flicker of movement caught my eye. I stopped dead in my tracks. A few yards away, a dark silhouette was pacing near the study. It was Marcus. He did not see me. The only light came from the cold, blue glare of a screen clutched tightly in his hands. It was not the small rectangle of a smartphone. It was wider. It looked exactly like the old tablet I had handed over to Chloe for her dog. The harsh blue light illuminated Marcus's face, revealing features twisted with pure, frantic desperation. His jaw was clenched tight, his eyes darting wildly across the screen, his thumb tapping furiously against the glass. He looked absolutely nothing like the arrogant millionaire from the dinner table. He looked like a cornered rat fighting for its life. A cold shiver crawled down my spine, sobering me up for a brief, terrifying second. A deep, primal instinct screamed inside my chest that something was terribly wrong, but my head throbbed violently from the bourbon. I rubbed my temples, convincing myself that I was just being paranoid. I told myself that the crushing pressure of my upcoming project was making me see invisible threats in the dark. I turned away, walked back to my room, and closed the door, willingly sealing my own fate. Monday morning hit Chicago with a brutal, gray chill. I was at my office desk by 6 o'clock in the morning, a massive mug of black coffee in one hand and my supplier invoices in the other. Today was the day. The concrete foundation contractors and the structural steel vendors were waiting for their initial deposits. I logged into my secure banking portal, my fingers flying across the keyboard with practiced precision. I hit enter. The loading wheel spun for 2 seconds. Then, the screen refreshed. Available balance, $0.00. I blinked. I rubbed my eyes, assuming it was a glitch, a server error, or a temporary display issue. I refreshed the page again. $0.00. My breath caught directly in my throat. I clicked into the transaction history, my hand shaking so violently that the plastic mouse clattered against the wooden desk. There it was, a single outgoing international wire transfer, initiated at exactly 3:15 in the morning on Sunday. Exactly $250,000. The entirety of my government loan, the absolute lifeblood of my company, was gone. It had vanished entirely into a string of meaningless alphanumeric routing digits. A physical wave of nausea slammed hard into my stomach. The walls of my office felt like they were rapidly closing in. My vision tunneled into a dark point. I was hyperventilating, desperately struggling to pull air into my tight lungs. My entire company, my professional reputation, my massive legal obligation to the federal government, all of it was suddenly and violently destroyed. I lunged across the desk for my cell phone and dialed the corporate fraud department. My hands were slick with cold sweat. I fought through the agonizing automated menus, screaming the word fraud at the robotic voice recognition system until my vocal cords felt raw and scraped. I was placed on an endless hold, subjected to cheerful elevator music while my entire universe burned completely to the ground. Then, my phone vibrated sharply against my cheek. It was a text message notification. I pulled the device away from my ear, assuming it was an automated fraud alert from the banking system. It was not the bank. The sender was Marcus. I opened the message, my eyes rapidly scanning the words. The text read, "Do not make a huge scene about this. We are in a really tight spot right now and desperately need this capital to cycle a major project. Honestly, we need it a lot more than you do. Do not worry. Next month when the profits roll in, I will pay you back double." The phone slipped from my sweaty grip and slammed heavily onto the desk. The air in the room suddenly turned freezing cold. The chaotic, deafening panic in my brain snapped instantly into a terrifying, crystalline clarity. The scattered pieces of the puzzle aggressively slammed together. The dark hallway in the lake house, the blue screen light illuminating his desperate, sweating face, the intense interrogation about my security protocols on the cold patio, and the iPad. The old iPad Chloe had practically begged to borrow for her absurdly pampered dog. As a structural engineer, I understood complex systems, and I instantly saw the catastrophic flaw in my own. My personal and business accounts were tied to the exact same mobile number for two-factor authentication. My cloud account was still fully logged into that old tablet. When the bank sent the 6-digit security code to my phone to confirm the massive midnight wire transfer, that exact same code simultaneously flashed onto the screen of the iPad sitting right next to Marcus in the dark. Chloe was the Trojan horse. She had walked right past my emotional defenses, smiling and playing the helpless victim, carrying the very technological tool her husband needed to bypass my final layer of digital security. I did not type a reply to his arrogant message. Instead, I bypassed Marcus entirely and dialed Chloe. The phone rang exactly one time before she picked up. She was already sobbing. It was not a sudden, surprised cry. It was the rehearsed, theatrical weeping of someone who had prepared her dramatic lines well in advance. "Brielle, please," Chloe choked out, her voice trembling with manufactured hysteria. "Please do not do anything crazy. You have to understand. You make money so easily. You are always so strong and so capable. But Marcus is drowning. His company is literally standing on the absolute edge of bankruptcy. We were going to lose our house. He just needs a temporary bridge loan. Please, you have to help us this one time. Just let us use it. Do not call the police." I sat perfectly still in my office chair, listening to the pathetic, wet sounds of my own sister begging me to calmly accept my financial execution. She knew. She had known exactly what he was planning, and she had actively helped him execute it. She had willingly participated in stealing my entire future just to maintain her comfortable, delusional lifestyle. "Brielle, are you there? Please say something," Chloe pleaded, her voice pitching higher into a desperate, sharp whine. "We are family." I opened my mouth, but no words came out. There was no blinding rage, no loud screaming, no hot tears. Something deep inside my chest simply detached and fell away into an endless, dark void. The lifelong chain of guilt and obligation that had forcefully bound me to her finally snapped in half. The silence stretching across the cellular connection was heavy, absolute, and utterly final. It was the undeniable sound of our blood tie dying completely. I pressed the red button, ending the call, and gently placed the phone face down on my desk. The frantic panic was entirely gone. In its place was a sharp, calculating ice. I stood up and walked over to the heavy oak door of my office. I turned the brass deadbolt. Hearing the solid, metallic click echo through the empty room, I walked over to the windows and pulled the blinds tightly shut, plunging the space into a cool, artificial gloom. I did not shed a single tear. I did not throw my coffee mug against the wall. I did not scream or curse the universe. Crying is a biological response to emotional pain, and right now, I absolutely refuse to feel pain. I was a structural engineer. When a building collapses, you do not sit in the rubble and weep. You examine the fracture patterns. You analyze the load paths. You find the exact stress point where the steel yielded, and then you track the failure back to the architect who drafted the flawed blueprint. I sat back down at my desk, the frantic panic completely evaporating from my veins, replaced by a sharp, freezing logic. I pulled up the wire transfer details again. My eyes scanned the routing information. It was an international transfer, pushed rapidly through a maze of intermediary banks, ultimately landing in a digital wallet held by an offshore cryptocurrency exchange. Marcus genuinely thought he was a genius. He assumed that converting fiat currency into untraceable digital tokens in a foreign jurisdiction was the perfect, victimless crime. But I remembered his drunken boasting at Thanksgiving 2 years ago. I remembered him bragging endlessly about a specific decentralized exchange operating out of a small island nation, boasting about how their total lack of compliance regulations made it the perfect vault for his high-yield investments. He was not a criminal mastermind. He was just a predictable, arrogant man following his own established patterns of greed. My hand hovered over the phone receiver, the standard. Emotional response was to call the Federal Bureau of Investigation or the local police fraud division immediately, but I ran the timeline in my head, calculating the friction of the legal system. I would file a report. An investigator would be assigned in 3 to 5 business days. Securing international subpoenas for banking records would take 4 to 6 weeks at an absolute minimum. By the time a federal agent even looked at Marcus, my construction deadlines would have passed. My vendors would sue me for breach of contract, and Apex Vertex Architecture would be forced into Chapter 11 bankruptcy within 30 days. If I went to the police right now, I would win a hollow moral victory a year from now, but I would lose my entire livelihood this very month. I needed a different weapon. I needed a surgical strike, not a slow bureaucratic siege. I opened an encrypted messaging application on my secure desktop and typed a message to Elias. Elias and I had survived the brutal physics and advanced calculus courses at university together, while I went into the physical world of structural load and concrete compression. Elias dove deep into the invisible architecture of cyberspace. He was a freelance cybersecurity consultant, a white-hat hacker who made his living testing the digital fortresses of massive corporations by breaking into them. I typed a brief, clinical summary of my situation, including the routing numbers, the exact timestamp of the midnight transfer, and the specific offshore exchange I suspected my brother-in-law was utilizing. Elias replied within 2 minutes. "Give me 3 hours. Do not contact the bank again. Do not alert the thieves." For the next 180 minutes, I paced my office, drafting a massive structural chart on my whiteboard. I mapped out every variable of Marcus and Chloe. I listed their assets, their social circles, and their psychological weaknesses. When my computer finally chimed with a secure video call request, I wiped the board completely clean and answered. Elias was sitting in a dark room, his face illuminated by a massive array of glowing monitors. He did not bother with pleasantries. "Your brother-in-law is an absolute idiot," Elias said, his voice crackling slightly over the encrypted connection. He used a rudimentary virtual private network to mask his initial login, but he accessed the crypto wallet using the exact same device signature he uses to log into his corporate email. He tied his massive digital heist directly to his professional identity. "Can you recover the $250,000? I asked, my voice completely devoid of emotion. "No," Elias replied bluntly. "It is locked in a smart contract that I cannot legally or illegally crack without tripping massive international alarms. But I found something infinitely better. I found the structural flaw in his entire foundation." Elias shared his screen, bringing up a dizzying array of ledgers, hidden corporate accounts, and internal transaction logs from the brokerage firm where Marcus was employed. "Marcus has a severe gambling problem," Elias explained, highlighting a series of massive negative numbers in red. "But it is not casinos. It is high risk, leveraged day trading. He has been losing heavily for the past 18 months. Your government loan was just a desperate patch for a massive, gaping hole. To cover his margin calls before taking your money, Marcus has been systematically embezzling funds from his own employer. He has been skimming off the top of his clients' portfolios, shifting the losses into dummy accounts. We are talking about nearly $1 million in stolen corporate funds. If his boss finds out, Marcus is not just getting fired. He is facing decades in federal prison." I stared at the glowing numbers on the screen. The equation was finally balanced. Marcus had stolen my present, but he had recklessly handed me the absolute power to annihilate his entire future. I thanked Elias, paid his exorbitant consulting fee from my personal emergency savings, and disconnected the call. Now, I needed to construct the trap. A trap only works if the prey believes they are walking into a safe, open field. I needed Marcus to feel victorious. I needed him to believe that his manipulation had worked, that I was just the same weak, forgiving sister who had bailed Chloe out of trouble a decade ago. I opened a new email, addressing it directly to Chloe. Knowing Marcus read every single message she received, I carefully crafted my tone. I could not sound strong or calculating. I had to sound utterly defeated, desperate, and pathetic. "Chloe, I am begging you to listen to me." I typed slowly, weighing every single word. "I have not called the authorities yet. I am terrified. If I report this, my business is ruined anyway because the funds will be frozen for months during the investigation. I surrender. You both win. I will let Marcus use the money for his project, but I cannot just let $250,000 float in the wind. I need a legal guarantee to show my accountants. Tell Marcus I will not go to the police, but he must meet me tomorrow night and sign a formal, legally binding promissory note acknowledging the debt and promising repayment with the interest he offered. If he signs it, I will stay quiet forever. Please, just give me this one piece of paper so I can sleep at night. I hit send. It was a masterpiece of psychological engineering. I knew exactly how Marcus's mind operated. His immense arrogance would completely blind him to the danger. He would read that email and laugh. He would view the promissory note not as a legal threat, but as a shiny trophy of his absolute dominance over me. He would eagerly agree to sign a worthless piece of paper to permanently silence the only witness to his crime. He thought he was successfully managing a minor nuisance. He had absolutely no idea he was eagerly stepping onto the execution block. I chose an upscale steakhouse in downtown Chicago for our meeting. It was Tuesday evening at exactly 7 o'clock. The restaurant was a cathedral of dark mahogany, dim amber lighting, and the muted hum of immense wealth. I sat in a secluded corner booth, a glass of ice water in front of me, waiting for the trap to spring. They walked through the heavy glass doors 20 minutes late. Marcus strode ahead, his chest puffed out under a brand-new navy blazer, looking every bit the conquering hero rather than a desperate thief. Chloe trailed slightly behind him, wearing a soft cashmere sweater and a fragile, relieved smile. She spotted me and immediately rushed over, sliding into the leather booth beside me. Marcus took the seat across the table, leaning back expansively and signaling the waiter with a snap of his fingers. He did not even glance at the menus. He ordered the dry-aged Wagyu ribeye for himself, the Chilean sea bass for Chloe, and a bottle of a vintage Bordeaux that I knew cost nearly $3,000. He was spending my stolen money right in front of my face, celebrating his successful heist. I have to say, Brielle, I am incredibly proud of you, Marcus said. Swirling the expensive red wine the waiter poured for him, he leaned forward, flashing a brilliant, utterly fake smile. I honestly thought you were going to throw a massive temper tantrum, but you are finally learning. I have always told you that running a successful business requires absolute flexibility. You cannot just rigidly follow the rules and expect to win. Consider this a forced evolution. Consider yourself a silent partner in my new venture. Chloe reached out and wrapped her warm, manicured hands around my cold fingers. She squeezed them affectionately, her eyes welling up with those perfectly timed, manipulative tears she had perfected since childhood. I knew you would understand. Brielle, Chloe murmured, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. You have always been the most amazing, supportive sister in the world. You are the rock of this family. You always sacrifice for us when we need it most, and I promise we will never, ever forget this. I gently withdrew my hand from her grasp. I did not recoil. I just smoothly pulled away to reach into my leather briefcase. I placed a crisp, 3-page legal document onto the pristine white tablecloth, the promissory note. Marcus chuckled softly, pulling a heavy gold pen from his breast pocket. He did not bother reading the clauses or the specific interest rates I had drafted. To him, the contract was just a meaningless pacifier, a temporary blanket to keep the crying baby quiet. He aggressively scrawled his signature on the final page, pushed the document back across the table, and took a large, triumphant gulp of his wine. There you go, Marcus said, wiping his mouth with a linen napkin. All legal and binding. You get your peace of mind, and I get to save my company. Everybody wins. I picked up the document, checked his signature, and carefully slid it back into my briefcase. I picked up my own glass of wine. I took a slow, deliberate sip, letting the complex flavors settle on my tongue. The agonizing tension that had been gripping my spine for the past 48 hours completely vanished. You are absolutely right, Marcus, I said, my voice perfectly level, completely devoid of the panic he so desperately wanted to hear. Running a business requires extreme flexibility. It requires recognizing structural vulnerabilities and reinforcing them before the building collapses. I reached into the small side pocket of my purse. I did not pull out another contract. I pulled out a sleek, heavy silver USB drive. I set it down directly in the center of the table, the polished metal gleaming under the amber overhead light. Marcus paused, his fork hovering halfway to his mouth. A faint shadow of confusion crossed his arrogant features. "What is that? Are you giving us digital copies of the contract?" "No," I replied smoothly, leaning back against the leather booth. I told Chloe in my email that I was not going to call the local Chicago Police Department, and I kept my word. I did not call them. Local authorities are incredibly slow. They lack the resources to handle complex digital asset transfers, and they frankly do not care about family disputes. Chloe stopped chewing. The artificial warmth entirely vanished from her eyes, replaced by a sudden, creeping dread. I kept my gaze fixed entirely on Marcus. "But you made a catastrophic miscalculation. You assumed the $250,000 you stole was just my personal revenue. It was not. It was a small business administration loan. That money was dispersed directly from the federal government of the United States." The heavy gold pen slipped from Marcus's fingers and clattered loudly against his porcelain plate. The color began to rapidly drain from his face. "That drive," I continued, pointing a single manicured finger at the silver device, "contains a complete digital dossier. It contains the exact IP addresses you used to access my account from Aunt Margaret's house. It contains the routing numbers for your offshore crypto wallet. But more importantly, Marcus, it contains the internal financial ledgers from your employer. The ledgers showing the nearly $1 million you have been actively embezzling from your own clients to cover your disastrous day trading losses over the past 18 months. Chloe gasped violently, her hands flying to her mouth. She stared at her husband in absolute, unadulterated horror. She had known about my money, but she clearly had no idea about the massive corporate theft he had been hiding from everyone. "Since the funds you stole from me belong to the federal government," I said, my voice dropping to a harsh whisper, "it immediately elevated your midnight theft from a local domestic dispute into a major federal crime. I sent a copy of that entire dossier to the Securities and Exchange Commission at exactly 4 o'clock this afternoon. I also sent a duplicate file directly to the Financial Crimes Division of the Federal Bureau of Investigation." Marcus sat completely paralyzed. His mouth opened and closed repeatedly, but no sound came out. The arrogant, untouchable businessman had completely vanished, instantly replaced by a hollow, terrified shell of a man realizing he was entirely trapped. Marcus stared at the silver flash drive sitting on the white tablecloth, his breathing suddenly turning shallow and erratic, but then a desperate, defiant sneer twisted his face. He let out a loud, barking laugh, shaking his head as he leaned aggressively across the table. "You think you are so brilliant," Marcus mocked, his voice trembling just slightly beneath the false bravado. "You can send whatever files you want to the authorities. Good luck getting a federal subpoena executed in a foreign jurisdiction that does not even recognize United States banking laws. My digital wallet is completely decentralized and totally untouchable. Even if they fire me, I still have the funds. I am keeping that money, and there is absolutely nothing you can do about it." I smirked, relishing the exact moment his arrogance peaked. I calmly picked up my phone, unlocked the screen, and pressed play on an audio file my cybersecurity expert, Elias, had sent me just an hour before this dinner. Elias's crisp, professional voice played through the phone speaker, loud enough for both Marcus and Chloe to hear perfectly. "The trap is closed," the voice stated. "I did not bother trying to hack his offshore account. I just took the internal embezzlement ledgers Marcus created and forwarded them directly to the International Cybercrimes Unit and the platform's own Global Compliance Board. I flagged his specific wallet address as a major node for international money laundering and illicit syndicate financing. To avoid being shut down by global regulators, the platform's algorithm automatically and permanently froze his entire account. All assets are locked pending international confiscation. He has zero access. He just lost every single penny." I paused the recording and placed the phone face down. "You have nothing. Marcus, You lost my money. You lost your stolen corporate funds, and you are entirely broke." Before Marcus could even process the catastrophic reality of his financial ruin, I glanced toward the front of the restaurant. By the way, I also sent that entire file of evidence directly to Arthur, the managing director of your brokerage firm. Right on cue, the heavy mahogany doors of the steakhouse swung wide open. A tall, furious-looking man in a dark overcoat stormed into the dining room. It was Arthur, and walking immediately behind him were two large, stern men wearing dark windbreakers with the letters denoting the Federal Bureau of Investigation clearly printed in bright yellow on the back. Marcus turned his head and saw them, the arrogant, untouchable businessman completely shattered into a million pathetic pieces. Absolute, primitive panic took over. He scrambled backward, sliding wildly out of the leather booth and knocking over his $3,000 bottle of vintage wine. The dark red liquid spilled violently across the pristine white table like fresh blood. "Wait!" Marcus screamed, his voice cracking into a high, hysterical pitch. Entirely ignoring the federal agents closing in on him, he pointed a shaking, cowardly finger directly at his wife. "It was her. Chloe made me do it. She gave me the device. She told me how to break into the accounts. She is the one who manipulated me into doing it." Chloe sat frozen, her mouth dropping open in sheer, unadulterated horror. The man she had endlessly defended, the man for whom she had gleefully betrayed her own flesh and blood sister, had just thrown her directly under a speeding train to save his own skin. Her beautiful, fragile illusion of a perfect marriage evaporated into thin air, leaving only the ugly, pathetic reality of the coward she had chosen. The federal agents did not care about his desperate finger-pointing. They grabbed his arms, forcefully spinning him around. The sharp, metallic click of heavy handcuffs locking around his wrists echoed loudly over the absolute silence of the shocked restaurant patrons. He was sobbing loudly, weeping like a terrified child as they forcefully marched him toward the exit. Chloe completely broke down. She slid out of the booth and literally collapsed onto her knees right on the floor. Her expensive designer sweater dragged through the spilled wine as she frantically wrapped her arms around my legs. She wailed at the top of her lungs, begging me to call my lawyers, begging me to withdraw the evidence, pleading for me to save her from the wreckage. I looked down at her tear-stained face, feeling absolutely nothing but a cold, heavy finality. I smoothly pulled my leg out of her desperate, grasping hands. I reached into my purse, pulled out a single $100 bill to cover my glass of water and my wine, and placed it on the table right next to the now utterly worthless promissory note. I did not say a single word to her. I simply turned my back and walked out into the cool, liberating Chicago night. Fast forward exactly 6 months later, I stood high up on the heavy steel scaffolding of the largest commercial development project in the entire downtown district. My architectural firm had officially won the massive contract, because I had actively cooperated with the federal authorities and handed them a massive corporate fraud case on a silver platter. The government had expedited the investigation and fully restored my stolen loan funds. My business was not just surviving anymore, it was rapidly expanding into an empire. My phone buzzed in the pocket of my safety jacket. It was an email from the district attorney. Marcus had been officially convicted and sentenced to 15 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary, completely without the possibility of early parole. Chloe, drowning in legal fees and facing potential accessory charges, had been forced to sell everything and was currently working double shifts at a cheap diner just to survive. I smiled, letting the strong wind whip through my hair as I looked out over the sprawling city skyline. I pulled my old cell phone out of my pocket, the device that had once tethered me to their endless, toxic drama. I looked at the dark screen one last time, then casually tossed it down into an industrial trash chute. Sometimes, the absolute best way to clean up your family is to completely demolish the rotting foundation, clear out the debris, and build your own impenetrable fortress from the ground up. Thank you so incredibly much, dear listeners, for staying with me until the very end of this journey. I would absolutely love to know where you are listening from today. So please leave a comment and let me know your location. If you found today's story engaging and satisfying, please consider helping our channel with just a $1 donation. You can easily do this by scanning the PayPal QR code currently on your screen or by clicking the PayPal link in the video description or the pinned comment. Your generous $1 contribution directly provides the budget to pay our hardworking staff, helping them feed their families and allowing us to continue creating these highly requested stories for you. Thank you for your incredible kindness, and I will see you in the next story.